Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome back to Night Stories from VHS Era. Have you ever raced against the clock just to get your hands on a movie before anyone else? Do you remember the thrill of walking into a video store and scanning the shelves with your heart pounding, hoping that movie would still be there? What did it feel like to hold a freshly released VHS in your hands, plastic case cool and smooth, knowing the weekend had just been made perfect? Stay with me until the end of this story, because by the time we finish tonight, you'll not only remember how it was, you'll feel like you're there again. Sitting in the passenger seat, fingers crossed, rewinding back to a time when everything seemed simpler. I was probably about 11, maybe 12. It's hard to be sure now, but what I do remember with perfect clarity was that Tuesday afternoon feeling. It was always a Tuesday. That was release day. The day new movies hit the shelves at Video World, our small-town video rental store that smelled like popcorn, plastic, and just a hint of old carpet and cardboard. That day, I didn't even wait for the school bell to finish ringing. The moment it buzzed, I was already halfway out the classroom door, backpack slapping against my spine, sneakers screeching across the tiled floor of the hallway like I was training for the Olympics. Do you remember running like that? For something so small, and yet it meant everything? My mom was parked right out front, engine idling, windows halfway down, because the air conditioner had gone out that summer and never quite made a return. I threw myself into the front seat, gasping, "It's out today. It's out. We have to go now." She didn't need me to say more. Moms in the 90s, especially mine, knew that movie nights were a big deal. We had planned this all week. The premiere of Jurassic Park on VHS. I had been counting the days like a mini advent calendar of popcorn and soda. The car ride felt longer than it actually was, probably because I kept imagining someone else grabbing the last copy just seconds before I could get there. I stared out the window as we passed the same corner store, the same sleepy diner with its blinking red neon open sign, the old Rexall pharmacy with its sun-faded awning. Everything in town moved slower than I needed it to, except my heart dot. As we pulled into the lot, I spotted it. The familiar purple and red sign of Video World. Half the bulbs always out, flickering in a way that made you feel like something magical was happening inside. I could see a couple kids my age already inside, their faces pressed against the new releases wall. I nearly threw the door open before the car stopped, calling back a rushed, "Thanks, Mom," as I sprinted toward the entrance. The moment those glass doors parted, a little bell jingled overhead, and I was hit with that unmistakable scent. Do you remember that? That sweet mix of plastic and tape reels and the mystery of 1,000 rented movies. The light buzzed gently above, soft and warm, casting shadows against rows and rows of upright cases, each with its little handwritten number tag stuck to the spine. My feet carried me straight to the new releases wall, which was tucked under a banner that read, "Just in sun-faded yellow and blue." I scanned it. My heart sank a little. The shelf was mostly empty. 5 spaces labeled Jurassic Park, and only 1 tape left. I didn't think. I just reached and touched it. My fingers wrapped around that thick plastic shell, and I held it up like a trophy. The front cover had the iconic black background with the red and yellow T-Rex logo, shiny and pristine. It even had that little sticker on the top that read, "Be kind, rewind," in those blocky blue letters. Do you remember those stickers? I swear, I can still feel the slightly bumpy texture of them under my thumb. That moment, it was victory. Pure childhood victory. Like winning a race no one else knew you were running. I walked up to the counter, trying to act cool, like I hadn't just run through town on a mission, like my heart wasn't still hammering in my chest. Behind the desk was Jerry, the same guy who'd worked there for what seemed like forever. He had a graying ponytail, wore the same faded Nirvana shirt every other Tuesday, and always had a toothpick in the corner of his mouth. He gave me a thumbs up. "Lucky kid," he said. "That was the last one," I smiled. I knew. He slid the tape into a soft brown rental sleeve, marked it with our last name on a tiny white sticker, and passed it over the counter. I held it in, both hands like it was something fragile. My mom came in just as I was tucking it safely into the crook of my arm. "Got it?" she asked. "I got it," I said, and I couldn't stop grinning. The ride home was quieter. Not because we didn't have things to say, but because I think both of us are already slipping into that soft kind of anticipation. The kind that builds slowly, the way a summer evening settles over your front porch. The kind that hums like static on a paused screen. When we got back, I did what I always did. Kicked off my sneakers, grabbed a bowl of Jiffy Pop, and turned on the living room fan, the tall, noisy one with a metal cage that rattled when you walked too hard across the carpet. The TV was one of those big wooden console ones with the fake wood paneling and clunky buttons you had to push, not click. I loved that thing. Even the slight buzzing sound it made when it warmed up added to the magic. I popped the tape in, hearing that satisfying click as it settled into place, and waited for the whirring of the VCR to kick in. The FBI warning screen came up first, blue and white, just like always, and then the trailers started. Remember when you couldn't skip trailers? And you watched them? Because they were part of the experience? I leaned back, the Jiffy Pop warm in my lap, the lights dimmed just enough, and the familiar orchestral roar of the opening credits began to swell. I thought then how lucky I was not. So, what was it like to race to the video store before the tapes were gone? It was a ritual, a countdown, a memory engraved in time like a pencil drawing on a school desk. It was sweaty palms, rushing footsteps, and that quiet moment of joy when you realized you made it just in time. That kind of anticipation, you don't find it in the world of instant streaming, do? Today, everything's a click away. But back then, it was a quest, a reward earned. And that reward came with grainy visuals, warm popcorn, and a quiet kind of happiness that lived. In the flicker of a tube TV in a living room, lit only by the glow of the screen. That's what it was like. And I miss it. There was something sacred about that walk from the counter to the car, the VHS cradled gently in my arms, like it was made of glass. I didn't toss it into a bag, didn't shove it into my backpack with my crumpled notebooks and pencil cases. No, I held it, carefully, like someone would hold a fragile time capsule. Because in many ways, that's exactly what it was. The sleeve was snug around the tape itself, a rich brown cardboard that folded neatly around the black plastic case. But what really caught your eye, what always made my heart flutter just a little, was that glossy, full-color movie cover pressed into the front of the case. It was bold, cinematic, epic, and for that week, or at least that weekend, it was mine. This one had it in bright red font. That unmistakable sticker slapped diagonally across the front corner of the case, like a memento, bold and impossible to miss. Even though it was in Portuguese, a leftover habit from the Brazilian owner who printed his own labels, it didn't matter. Everyone knew what it meant. It meant new. It meant fresh. It meant that you were one of the first people to get your hands on it before the sticker began to peel, before the corners got scuffed, before the tape inside began to warp from being played one too many times on a dusty VCR dot. Do you remember running your fingers over the surface of that cover? The way the slick laminate coating caught the light in patches as you tilted it back. And fourth, sometimes the colors looked richer. The blues deeper, the reds more intense. Like the characters could jump right off the front and into your living room. I traced the lines of the logo with my index finger all the way home. It was more than a tape. It felt like holding a piece of cinema history. I think that's what made VHS tapes feel so different. They weren't just data. They weren't just files you downloaded or links you streamed. They were objects, tangible. You could hold them, smell them, stack them, alphabetize them, hide them in shoeboxes under your bed, swap them with friends like baseball cards. When we got home that day, I didn't want to pop it in right away. Not yet. I needed a moment with it. I went straight to my room, sat cross-legged on the floor, and opened the case slowly. That click as the plastic tabs gave way, that was a sound I wish I could bottle up and carry with me always. Inside, the tape rested snug in its groove, the reels visible through the transparent window. Do you remember watching the spools spin and guessing how long until the credits rolled? There was always a faint smell when you opened a fresh case. Some mix of plastic and ink and a hint of dust, like a library, but warmer. I inhaled it gently, without even thinking. The tape was rewound already. That meant someone at the store had checked it. Another reminder of the human touch that made that era so different. Someone had sat behind the counter, probably on a slow morning, rewinding dozens of tapes, one click at a time. The front insert had everything. The tagline in bold, the actors' names, the production studio logo in the corner, and always a few tiny still images on the back. Those pictures mattered. They were the only preview you had beyond what you'd seen on TV or heard from your friends. 3 or 4 frozen moments from the movie, carefully selected, giving you just enough to spark your imagination. I remember tilting the box toward the light and reading every word on the back. An unforgettable adventure, it promised. The summer blockbuster of the decade, it insisted. Hyperbole, maybe, but back then, I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? The box itself made it feel important. Like the movie inside had weight, not just in ounces, but in meaning. I must have held that tape for 20 minutes before I actually watched it. Just me and the case, sitting on the carpeted floor, the ceiling fan above me whirring softly, light from the window stretching in long golden lines across the room. It felt like a ceremony, a quiet honoring of something that deserved to be noticed. Respected, remembered. Do you ever think about how we used to treat movies like they were guests in our homes? We gave them our full attention. We made popcorn in pans, not in microwaves. We fluffed pillows and dimmed the lights and told everyone in the house, "Don't talk. It's starting." And when it did start, there were no distractions. No phones. Buzzing, no tabs open. Just the hum of the VCR and the flickering light of the story unfolding. Back in the living room, I finally brought it over and placed it on top of the VCR. The machine itself was silver and black, with big square buttons, and a little red LED clock that was always blinking 12 o'clock. I loved that dumb blinking clock. I never said it, and somehow it made the room feel cozier. Like the VCR was always waiting for me. The case sat there for a moment longer. I didn't put it in right away. I just looked at it. One remember thinking one day these might not exist anymore. Maybe I didn't say it out loud. Maybe I didn't even fully understand it, but something deep inside knew. That one day, this feeling, this exact feeling of holding something physical that carried with it a whole universe, might be gone. And that's why I savored it. Because in my hands wasn't just a movie. It was time travel. It was memory. It was history. It was a piece of childhood, a piece of the world, pressed into plastic and magnetized tape and wrapped in a label that screamed like a memento, as if announcing to all who saw it, this moment matters. I gently pushed the tape into the VCR. That mechanical pull, the satisfying internal clunk, as it locked into place, it felt like opening a door into another world. And as the screen blinked from blue to black and the whir of the tape kicked in, I leaned back into the couch and smiled, because I knew that for the next couple hours, I wasn't just watching a movie. I was holding a piece of cinema history in my hands. There was a sacred stillness in the moments just before pressing play. We had finally made it home, and though the afternoon light was still glowing warmly through the curtains, everything felt like it was slowly settling into place, like the world knew something important was about to begin. I carried the VHS tape like a torch, leading the quiet procession from the kitchen to the living room. Even the way I held it had changed slightly. It no longer felt like a prize to be claimed, but rather a responsibility. Before anything could happen, I had to set the stage. Do you remember what it was like to treat a movie night like a ritual? You didn't just pop the tape in and casually flop onto the couch. No, you prepared. First came the light patrol. I'd walk over to the windows and tug the floral pattern. Curtains closed, just enough to block the streaks of sunlight, but not so tight that the room went pitch black. That golden dimness, the kind you only got in the early evening, was perfect. The kind of lighting that made shadows stretch out across the carpet and gave the room a soft, quiet hum. Then I'd check the seating. The couch cushions had to be fluffed. The Afghan that Grandma had crocheted years ago got folded just right and placed over the backrest. There was a pillow, my pillow, that I had claimed as mine years ago. It had a faint pattern of tiny stars, almost faded from countless washings, and it smelled like home. That went right in the middle of the couch, under my elbow. And then, the shoes came off. That's how you knew it was serious. If someone still had their shoes on when I was about to press play, I'd shoot them a look, a warning, because this wasn't just some random Tuesday night. This was movie night, a premiere, no less. That deserved full respect. Okay, I'd say, standing in front of the TV like an usher in a theater, everyone quiet. Sometimes I said it gently, sometimes with a touch of command, depending on the mood in the room. But the meaning was always the same. No talking, no interruptions, no asking questions during the opening scene. If you had something to say, now was the time, because once that tape started rolling, the room became sacred ground. I'd glance around the room to make sure the message had landed. Mom would nod, usually smiling as she folded laundry on the side chair. Dad would grumble good-naturedly, sliding his glasses up his nose as he leaned back. My little sister, on the floor with a bowl of buttery popcorn balanced in her lap, would give me a thumbs up and press her lips together in exaggerated silence. It always made me laugh. Even the family cat, sprawled lazily across the armrest, seemed to understand. Silence. Reverence. Now, don't get me wrong, there was still noise. The low crunch of popcorn, the occasional squeak of the old couch springs. But the important thing was that no one talked. The kind of quiet we made was filled with anticipation, not awkwardness. We were waiting together, holding our breath for the story to begin. I stepped over to the VCR and knelt in front of it, just like always. Do you remember what that felt like? Being the one who got to press the button? It was an honor, a responsibility, like conducting a symphony. You didn't just jam it in and walk away. You loaded the tape like a conductor lifting the baton. And so, with everyone seated, lights dimmed, and silence finally achieved, I reached forward. The play button was rectangular, with white lettering that had started to wear off from. Use. I pressed it gently, feeling the slight give beneath my fingertip, followed by the soft whir of the tape being pulled into motion. There was a pause, blink of blue screen, then the flickering started. The fuzzy white lines danced briefly at the bottom of the screen as the magnetic tape found its rhythm. And then, the screen came alive. Usually, there were trailers first. Glorious previews of other upcoming rentals, with deep-voiced narrators. And dramatic cuts, the kind that promised everything. Sometimes I enjoyed those as much as the movie itself. They were like the appetizer before the main course. But in that first minute, we were all still settling into the experience. That's why the silence was so important. Because it gave space for magic. I'd sink into the couch, still warm from the sun earlier that day, and feel the fabric under my arm, the soft hum of the VCR below the TV, the shared presence of everyone in the room. Quietly watching Dot. Do you remember the last time you gave a movie your full attention? No scrolling, no chatting, no checking who else was watching. Just watching. That was what we had. That was what made those nights unforgettable. It was more than entertainment. It was family. It was being together, truly together, without even saying a word. Sometimes I'd steal a glance around the room. Dad chuckling at a silly joke in the trailer. Mom lifting her mug of tea without taking her eyes off the screen. My sister completely transfixed, mouth open slightly, popcorn forgotten in her lap. I didn't want to interrupt, but I loved those moments. Those were the snapshots that stuck with me. Eventually, the movie would begin. The opening notes of the score. The studio logo. That iconic fade-in, but that first quiet moment, before the music, before the voices, before anything at all. That was my favorite part, because it meant we had all arrived. We were present. We were ready. And I knew deep in my heart that we were about to share something special. That's why I always asked everyone to be quiet before hitting play. Because some stories deserve to be heard in silence. Because that kind of quiet wasn't empty. It was full. Full of promise. Full of memory. Full of everything that made those nights so sacred. And to this day, when I sit down to watch something, anything, I still feel that old instinct rising up. To check the lights. To fluff the pillow. To silence the room, not to press play. Not just with my finger, but with my whole heart. It's funny how some sounds live forever in your memory. They're not loud or dramatic. They're subtle, humble even. But somehow, they root themselves deep in your heart and stay there, long after the machines have been packed away, long after the shelves have emptied. For me, one of those sounds was the soft mechanical whir of the VCR pulling in the tape. It didn't matter how many times I heard it, it never got old. There was a moment, right after sliding the VHS into the slot, when time seemed to hesitate. For a heartbeat, the room would grow still, and then that low, steady sound would begin. A soft VVVT, ... click ... As the machine came alive, gently swallowing the tape into its mysterious inner world. Do you remember that? That quiet promise that something was about to begin? I used to listen for it. That sound was part of the ritual. Without it, the night felt incomplete. It was like hearing the rustle of curtains before a stage play, or the distant chatter in a movie theater just before the lights dim. It wasn't just a sound, it was the signal that the magic was ready to unfold. I always knelt down in front of the TV when I inserted the tape, my hands steady, respectful. You didn't force the cassette in, you guided it, softly, like placing something precious into a vault. The VCR accepted it with a gentle grip, pulling it in slowly, and then came that tiny but perfect pause before the heads engaged. The machine clicked into gear, almost like it was clearing its throat before telling you a story. It was comforting, almost alive, not like today's devices, all silent and cold, hidden behind polished glass and invisible software. The VCR spoke, not in words, but in gentle, consistent motions and tones. It said, "I'm ready when you are." It said, "Settle in, this will be good." It said, "We're going somewhere tonight." Sometimes I'd delay pressing play just to hear that sound linger a little longer. I'd sit back on my heels, staring at the blinking lights on the front panel. There was the red LED that indicated the tape was in. Sometimes it would flash, sometimes it would glow steady, depending on the model. But it always felt like a little heartbeat, ticking quietly in the dark. The hum of the VCR was soft enough that it almost disappeared beneath the room's natural silence. But I could always hear it, and I liked that. It was like background music. Before the real score began, I remember lying back on the couch after pressing the tape in, staring up at the ceiling fan spinning gently overhead, and just listening. The world outside continued moving, the occasional bark of a dog, the rumble of a car passing on the street, but inside that room, nothing else mattered. That whirring sound was my anchor. It told me I was home. It told me that for the next 2 hours, there were no school assignments, no chores, no growing up. Just story. Do you remember how the TV would flash blue while the tape adjusted inside? That little moment of uncertainty where you wondered, is it working? And then, without fail, the picture would blink in black first, then flickers of static lines across the bottom. You never even thought to call that imperfect. That was perfection. Once the VCR began spinning the reels, you could almost hear the gentle rotation inside, like the quiet breathing of an old friend. The tape, spools turning slow and steady, like they knew exactly what they were doing. That sounded was safety. It was childhood. To this day, I sometimes find myself imitating that sound in my head when I need to calm down. That soft work lunk, so small, yet so packed with meaning. It's amazing how much emotion can be stored in something so mechanical. But I think that's why we loved it. The VCR didn't try to hide what it was. It clicked, it buzzed, it grumbled softly when rewinding. It spoke to us in motion and sound. It let us feel the process of entering a story. There was a magic to the physicality of it all. You held the tape, inserted it with intention, listened for the familiar sound, and waited patiently. You weren't skipping scenes or checking the timestamp or wondering how much was left. You were present, from the first sound to the last credit. Sometimes, even if I had seen the movie before, I'd sit through the entire opening sequence just to relive that first few seconds. I didn't want to fast forward. That felt wrong, like skipping the overture at a concert. The moment you heard the tape pull in and begin to spin, It felt like you were entering a portal, and I think that's why it still lingers in my memory. That sound wasn't just about a machine doing its job. It was about beginning. It was about that line between the ordinary and the extraordinary. About sitting in a quiet room, heart a little lighter, because something beautiful was about to happen. We didn't know it then, but those nights were magic stitched into the fabric of ordinary life. We didn't need grand adventures. We just needed a rectangular black box, a television screen, and that soft, familiar whir that meant everything's in place now. So yes, the tape being pulled into the VCR was a simple act. But to me, it was the opening of a door into another world. And it never stopped feeling like magic. It always began the same way, like a ceremony with its own secret rules and rhythm. The screen would flicker, those ghostly static lines dancing across the bottom, and for a split second, I would hold my breath. The tape was inside. The room was quiet. The lights were dimmed just right. And then there it was. The blue screen vanished, and the unmistakable signal that we were about to start appeared. A white text message over a solid black background. The FBI warning. How could something so serious feel so exciting? I used to read every word, every time, even though I didn't understand half of what it meant. This video cassette is for private home viewing only. Duplication or public performance is strictly prohibited, under penalty of law. I didn't know what unauthorized reproduction was. I certainly didn't know what a federal offense meant, but I knew it sounded important. It made the experience feel bigger, heavier, like this wasn't just a random tape you shoved into the machine. No, this was a piece of something official, protected, respected, like I was borrowing a treasure, under strict orders not to misuse it. Did you ever feel like you were getting away with something, even when you weren't? That was part of the fun. Sitting there in our living room, wrapped in a blanket, wearing mismatched socks and my old Looney Tunes slippers, I felt like I was participating in something that belonged in a grander place. A kind of place with red velvet ropes and ushers, with flashlights. And yet here I was, in my house, curled into the corner of a couch with a popcorn bowl half the size of my face. It was all so perfectly cozy, like sneaking into a premiere, but legally. That static screen, though, it was like a signal to settle in. It came right before the warning, usually sudden and bright. I remember how it filled the entire TV with shimmering white fuzz, little black and gray dots bouncing like digital snowflakes across the glass. The VCR had a mind of its own sometimes, needing just a few seconds to get its bearings before the image sharpened. But even those seconds felt sacred. I'd glance around the room and see everyone's eyes glued to the screen, even though nothing was happening yet. That's what it was like in those days. We watched, we waited, we gave attention to every step of the journey, even the ones with no plot, no characters, no dialogue, just ... moments, quiet ones, the kind that gently whispered, almost there. And then came that warning, blocky white letters, no music, no voices. Just that commanding black screen, usually lasting 10 or 15 seconds, though it always felt longer, as if it were pausing to make sure you understood. You're about to witness something that matters. There was something nostalgic about how earnest it all felt, like the tape was asking for your respect before showing you its secrets. And we gave it, willingly, happily. Sometimes, while waiting for the actual movie to begin, I'd pull my blanket tighter around my shoulders and glance toward the kitchen, where Mom would be pouring herself a second cup of tea. The scent of chamomile would drift into the room, mixing with the buttery smell of popcorn and the faint plastic warmth of the VCR itself. I remember how the light from the TV reflected in my sister's glasses as she stared ahead, eyes wide. And unblinking, already lost in the expectation of what was to come. I felt like I was part of something special. Do you remember what it was like to feel like a movie night was an event? Not just background noise while scrolling your phone. Not just something you half-watched while multitasking. No, this was a destination, a commitment, a reward after a long week of school and chores and eat your vegetables. And somehow, that warning screen, the dry, legal, no fun allowed warning screen, was a part of that reward. Because it made it official. It said, yes, this is real. This is the same tape they'd play at a theater press screening. This is the movie. And for a kid sitting cross-legged in a living room in 1996, that was everything. Right after the warning faded, sometimes the studio logo would appear, or maybe a series of previews. But that transition from static to warning to opening credits was pure poetry to me. Like the pages of a storybook turning themselves, like the curtain being pulled back on a magic trick. And I never wanted to miss a second of it. I think what made it all so vivid was how those early moments forced you to slow down. They weren't skippable. You didn't fast forward through the FBI warning. You didn't hit a button to jump straight to the plot. You waited. You watched. You breathed in the silence. And somehow, that made everything feel bigger. I used to. Imagine the agents behind the warning too. Don't laugh. I pictured a whole office of serious men in Navy suits, watching me through some invisible portal, making sure I didn't record over the tape, or invite the entire neighborhood over for a ticketed screening. It was silly, sure, but it added to the sense of importance. Like this movie had been sent with care, and I had been treated with honor. But there was a sweetness to that seriousness. Even though we were just a little family in a little house, even though our only audience was ourselves, and maybe the cat curled up on the rug, we treated the experience with reverence. That tape was a portal. That whirring machine was a doorway. And that FBI warning was the key that unlocked it all, Dot. So yes, I sat there, slippers on, heart beating just a little faster, watching that monochrome warning screen flash by. Not with boredom, not with impatience, but with quiet excitement. Because after that, the magic began. There was something sacred about where you chose to sit when the movie finally began. Not because anyone said it was important, but because the arrangement had its own unspoken rules. The carpet in the middle of the living room, that was prime. Real estate. It placed you closest to the screen, almost too close, but just right for a child who wanted to be swallowed whole by the story. The cushions and the couch behind acted like a gentle wall, creating a little cinema nest. And nestled, at the heart of it all, was the one thing that completed the ritual. A big bowl of popcorn, but not just any bowl. It was the bowl, Dot. We had this old yellow plastic bowl with faded blue stripes along the rim. It had probably come from some promotional cereal box giveaway in the late 80s. A bit scratched, maybe slightly warped on one side from too many dishwasher runs. But in our house, that was the popcorn bowl. It wasn't questioned. If you saw that bowl on the coffee table, filled to the brim, you knew movie night had officially begun, Dot. Do you remember that smell? That rich, buttery wave that filled the entire house, clinging to your clothes and making your fingers shine just a little? It didn't matter if the movie was a comedy, an action flick, or some animated treasure from the latest clamshell case. The popcorn set the tone. Warm, slightly salted, and always too hot at first. We never waited for it to cool. That first handful always burned just a bit, but it was worth it. The living room lights were dimmed, but not completely off. Just low enough to mimic a theater ambience, using a nearby lamp with a pleated shade that cast soft, golden shapes across the walls. The kind of lighting that made everything feel calm, safe, and timeless. We didn't need darkness. We had mood. That soft glow made the room feel smaller, cozier. Like the world outside had paused for a while. The sofa, our big, boxy brown one with cushions that sank just enough, became the VIP section. It was reserved for the adults, or for whoever called dibs first and could defend their spot through a series of well-argued negotiations. I usually chose the floor, even when there was space on the couch, because the floor, right in the center, was the best seat in the house. I'd grab a couple of pillows from the bedrooms, maybe drag over a folded blanket, and make my movie fort, sitting cross-legged, toes wiggling against the carpet fibers, the popcorn bowl resting on my lap. I felt like I had entered a different reality. Can you remember the way that soft carpet felt beneath your hands? The tiny crumbs of popcorn that always escaped and became tiny treasures by the final scene? The way your knees pressed into the floor until they left little dents? Sometimes, if it was a really exciting movie, I'd lean forward without realizing it, inching closer and closer until I was practically nose to screen. And then someone, probably my mom, would gently remind me to scoot back. "You're going to ruin your eyes," she'd say, her voice soft, almost a whisper, as if even the smallest sound might break the spell of the story. It wasn't just the movie that made it special. It was everything around the movie. The rhythm of the evening, the warmth in the room, the laughter at the trailers that played before the main feature. Occasionally, Dad would sneak an extra topping into the popcorn, like a drizzle of caramel or some M&Ms tossed in while it was still hot. They'd melt just enough to stick, turning a handful into a little adventure of flavor. We'd pass the bowl around, usually with whispers like, "Don't take all the good pieces," or "Save some for me." No one measured how much they were eating. There were no rules, really just this gentle understanding that we were sharing more than just snacks. We were sharing time, connection, that invisible thread that bound us together in that quiet, glowing room. The background sounds completed the experience. The soft hum of the VCR, the occasional creak of the couch springs, the rhythmic flicker of the TV screen dancing across the walls. And underneath it all, the low murmur of our own breathing as we leaned into the story. The world had slowed down. Our worries had quieted. And there we were, side by side, suspended in time, all because of a movie and a bowl of popcorn. Sometimes I'd glance over at my sister and see her already mouthing lines she knew by heart. Or at Dad, whose eyes would close halfway through, even though he swore he was just resting them. And Mom, always wrapped in her robe, smiling as if she knew that one day we'd remember these nights more than the movies themselves. And you know what? She was right, because now, years later, I don't remember every movie we watched. I don't recall every plot or every line of dialogue, but I remember how it felt. Sitting on that old carpet, feet warm under the blanket, the TV glow painting soft shadows on the walls, the smell of popcorn, the sound of soft laughter, the joy of just being together. So yes, that living room was our cinema. The popcorn was our red carpet, the sofa our box seats, and the carpet right in the middle of everything was mine. That was where the magic happened. Before the main feature ever began, before we got swept away into the story we had waited so long to see, there came that unmistakable prelude, the trailers. And in those days, they weren't just ads or things to skip. They were part of the experience. Sitting there on the living room carpet, popcorn bowl between my knees, I leaned forward just a little when I heard that deep-voiced narrator say, "Coming soon to own on video cassette." Can you still hear that voice in your head? It had weight to it, a warmth, a promise. And the moment it echoed through the room, everyone fell silent again, not out of politeness, but anticipation. Because you never quite knew what might appear next. A Disney sequel? A new live-action comedy? A re-release of a classic we hadn't seen since preschool? Sometimes just one glimpse of a familiar logo sent us into a frenzy. Look! Look! That's the one with the dog that drives the car. No way! They're making a second one? Mom, that's the one I told you about at the store. There was electricity in those moments. The kind that only came when you realized something new was coming, and that soon, it too would be yours to hold in that black clamshell case with the glossy cover and the red new release sticker. You didn't just watch trailers. You studied them, memorized them, let them simmer in your imagination until the day they showed up on the shelf at the video store, and you could finally shout, I remember this one. Sometimes the trailers were so well put together, so perfectly scored and voiced, they made the movie that followed feel like a quiet afterthought. Do you remember that strange feeling? That maybe, just maybe, you had already experienced the highlight before the real story even began? It wasn't disappointing, though. If anything, it was thrilling. Like you had been given a glimpse into the future, and it was full of magic waiting just around the corner. The best trailers knew exactly how to tease without revealing too much. A flash of dialogue, a swell of music, a slow-motion shot of someone leaping dramatically across a rooftop, then cut to black. Title screen. Release date. Done. And we were left buzzing. I remember one night, a trailer came on for a space adventure none of us had heard about. There were aliens and lasers, and a spaceship shaped like a soda can. My sister and I stared at each other, with wide eyes, mouths open, the popcorn now forgotten on the floor. It didn't matter that it might be months before it came out. In that moment, we had already decided it was our next obsession. And oh, the trailers for animated movies? That was a different kind of excitement. The music, the colors, the jokes delivered with that perfect comedic timing. Sometimes we'd quote the trailers more than the actual movies. Coming to video cassette this fall became a sort of chant around the house, like a spell we recited when passing the fridge or brushing our teeth. Even Mom would play along, repeating lines she barely understood, but heard us echo so many times. Have you ever looked forward to something so much that it felt like you were already part of it? That's what trailers did to us back then. They didn't just advertise, they invited. They pulled us forward through the calendar, past birthdays and holidays, toward some random Tuesday or Friday when that movie would finally be available to rent. And in the meantime, we'd dream. We'd talk. We'd imagine scenes that didn't exist based on a few quick cuts and dramatic pauses. And sometimes, just sometimes, the movie itself couldn't quite live up to that 2-minute masterpiece that preceded it. But we didn't care. Because the trailer had already done its job. It had ignited something in us, a sense of wonder, a hunger for more stories. At school, we'd compare notes. Did you see the one with the kid who finds the magic remote control? I think that monster one is from the same people who made the Surfing Penguins. My cousin said she saw the trailer for it in theaters, and it's way longer than the one on the tape. And just like that, trailers became currency. They weren't just clips. They were previews of possibility. As a kid, you didn't have much control over time. You couldn't speed up the days or make a movie come out sooner. All you had was that little glimpse that promised delivered through your TV speakers. And that was enough. Enough to keep the excitement going. Enough to carry your imagination until the next trip to the video store. Looking back, I realize now that those trailers were little lessons in hope, in patience, in anticipation, because even as we sat there, still waiting for our movie to begin, our hearts were already skipping ahead to the next, and the next, and the one after that. We were building a future of stories, one trailer at a time. That living room, with its soft lamplight and popcorn-strewn carpet, wasn't just a place to watch a movie. It was a place where dreams were planted, and it all started with coming soon to own There was something strangely perfect about the imperfections of a VHS tape. As the trailers faded out and the screen dimmed to black, the opening scene of the movie would slowly fade in, not with crystal clarity, but with a gentle fuzziness that made everything feel softer, warmer, and somehow more human. The picture didn't pop like today's screens do. It pulsed. It breathed. Can you still remember that warm haze that settled over the movie like a light fog? The blacks weren't really black, and the whites sometimes glowed too brightly around the edges. Faces had a subtle blur, as if lit by candlelight, and fast motion often left little trails behind, like the movie was reluctant to let go of a moment too soon. But we didn't mind. In fact, we loved it. That soft distortion gave everything a dreamlike quality, like watching a memory while it was still being made. The colors weren't sharp, but they were rich. Deep reds that looked like velvet, golden yellows that reminded me of Sunday afternoon sun through the kitchen window, blues that hummed quietly rather than shouted. There was something earthy, something analog and grounded about the way those colors played on our old RCA screen. Even the fuzz, those tiny specks of static that danced in the corners, felt like part of the story dot. It's funny, isn't it, how we now strive for perfection in our screen's pixels sharp enough to count. Eyelashes, brightness that outshines the sun, yet none of that feels as real as those old tapes ever did. I remember lying on the carpet, head resting against a pillow, eyes fixed on the screen as a forest scene came into view. The trees weren't razor-sharp outlines. They were soft blurs of green and brown, with sunlight filtering through in slow moving. Patches of gold. It was less like looking at something, and more like being inside it. You didn't just see the story. You felt it wrapping itself around you like a flannel blanket. And do you remember when the tape had been watched one too many times? The picture would start to wobble slightly, as if the movie were sighing under its own weight. Horizontal lines would skip across the screen now and then, and sometimes the image would roll or jitter until the VCR corrected itself. Still, we never complained. Those flaws were badges of honor, proof that this story had been lived with, loved, and rewound 100 times. The sound matched the image in its warmth. It wasn't digital. It wasn't crisp. It had depth. The voices came through a little muffled, like they were speaking through velvet. The music swelled in waves, not spikes, and every now and then you'd hear that soft, unmistakable hum of the tape rolling behind it all. It was as though the story had a heartbeat, and that heartbeat, that quiet thrum of analog life, brought with it a kind of calm that I still chase today. Maybe that's what made the whole experience so cozy, not just the image or the sound, but how it all blended with the moment. The flickering TV glow mixing with the low lamp light, the way the warm tones on the screen matched the soft colors of the living room, with its brown couch, pale beige carpet, and golden popcorn in the bowl. Everything felt in sync, like the movie and the room and our hearts had all agreed on the same rhythm for the evening. We didn't notice the grain. We didn't care about resolution. What mattered was how the movie felt, and when that slightly fuzzy picture came to life on screen, it was like stepping into a little world that had been waiting patiently for us. A world that didn't shout or dazzle, but invited. Gently, quietly, with warmth dots sometimes. If it was a movie we'd seen before, we could predict the exact moment when the tape would twitch, maybe during a dramatic scene or just before the ending. Credits. We knew those tapes like old friends. Every little glitch was familiar, even comforting. And sometimes, when we popped in a newer tape, one that hadn't been worn down yet, the clearness of the image almost startled us. We missed the fuzz, the warmth, the memory that clung to the imperfections. And so, even as the world outside was moving on to DVDs and clearer formats, we stayed loyal to that soft glow, because VHS wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present. It was about slowing down, about watching something all the way through, about rewinding, not skipping, about earning your favorite scenes with patience, not a menu screen. That image, blurred at the edges, golden in tone, and humming softly in the dark, it was our comfort, our childhood, our quiet Friday night magic dot. So when I think of movies, even now, my mind doesn't drift to high definition or surround sound. It goes back to those slightly fuzzy scenes, to the glow that made our faces shine, to the way it made everything feel slower, simpler, and so wonderfully close. That was VHS. That was home. Even before the end credits finished rolling, even before the final notes of the soundtrack had faded into silence, I was already thinking about rewinding. Not the whole movie, no. Just the best parts. The ones that made us laugh so hard we couldn't breathe. The ones that made us cover our mouths in disbelief. The scenes we quoted so often. We knew them word for word, line for line, pause for pause, Dot. Do you remember doing that too? When the screen dimmed to black and the living room settled into the quiet hum of the VCR, there was always that little pause, that moment of stillness where nobody moved, as if we had all just come back from somewhere far away. But then, slowly, someone would whisper what we were all thinking. Let's watch that scene again. And just like that, the magic wasn't over. It was only paused. I'd press the stop button on the chunky VCR remote. Remember how it had those rubbery buttons that you had to push just right? And then rewind. There was a very specific sound to that. A high-pitched whirring, fast and mechanical, like the tape was catching its breath after running a marathon. We'd listen closely, watching the counter numbers blur backward, trying to guess when to stop Dot too soon. And we'd miss the build-up. Too far, we'd have to fast forward again, just a little. It was an art, a ritual, a dance between fingertips and memory, Dot. And when we landed on the perfect spot, we'd hit play. That scene would bloom back to life, warm and familiar, like it had been waiting just behind the curtains to perform again for its most loyal audience. Sometimes it was a silly moment, a pratfall, a funny face, a ridiculous line shouted at just the right pitch. Other times, it was something quieter, a hug between characters we loved. A moment of music paired with just the right look. A scene that hit our hearts in a way we didn't have words for yet. But whatever it was, we watched it again, and again, and sometimes again. Each viewing brought something new. A background detail we hadn't noticed. A line we didn't quite catch the first time. The shape of the actor's smile. The exact way the light fell through the window. We soaked it in, frame by frame, like pressing flowers into the pages of our memories. And oh, the rewind button was a little gamble, wasn't it? Because sometimes, especially with those older tapes, or the ones we had watched 100 times too many, the rewind came with a little risk. That split second of silence before the tape kicked in, that heartbeat of panic as the VCR paused, blinked, and then WHIRRR ... clack ... relief. The tape was safe. This time, but there were moments rare dreaded when the sound wasn't right. When the machine made a strange clicking. When the screen went gray. When the tape didn't move at all. We'd freeze. All of us. Holding our breath like doctors. In an emergency room, did it get stuck? Try ejecting it. No, just wait. Give it a second. Sometimes we had to pop the tape out and peek inside, gently, nervously, to see if the film had come loose or wound up awkwardly inside. We treated it like something sacred, a relic, a heartbeat on a strip of black ribbon. And if we saw even a little crinkle, we knew it might never play the same way again. But most nights, we got lucky. The tape rewound cleanly. The scene replayed, and our joy reset like clockwork. I remember one night, after watching a movie none of us expected. To love so much, we rewound the final scene 3 times in a row. It was just a character walking away down a snowy street, music rising behind them, but something about it held us. Maybe it was the way they looked back for just a second. Maybe it was the way the lights glowed in the cold air. Or maybe it was. Sue S. our own stories, our own lives reflected in the simplest moment. Each replay deepened our connection, not just to the movie, but to each other. We didn't talk much during those rewatches. We just watched, we felt, and in that silence, something special lived. Something unspoken. VHS taught us patience. To wait, to rewind, to savor. It wasn't like today, where you can tap a screen and jump anywhere instantly. Back then, if you wanted to relive a moment, you had to earn it. With a soft hum, a spinning reel, and a little bit of hope. And I think that's what made it all feel so real. The waiting, the care, the tenderness of holding joy on tape and not taking it for granted. Even now, when I hear the faint echo of a rewinding sound rare, though it is, I feel something settle in me. A kind of peace, a comfort, a memory of simpler nights, soft lights, shared laughter, and that unspoken agreement that some scenes were just too good to watch only once. Because sometimes, watching something again didn't mean you missed it the first time. It meant you felt it and wanted to feel it again. The night had quietly wound down to its last notes. The movie was over, but the glow from the TV still filled the room with that soft, bluish light that somehow made everything feel gentle and safe. I remember sinking deeper into the cushions of the couch, feeling the warmth of the living room wrap around me like a cozy blanket. The popcorn bowl was empty. The room smelled faintly of buttery goodness, and the VHS tape was still spinning slowly inside the VCR, finishing its final run. Have you ever noticed how the credits roll in such a calming way? Those names scrolling slowly upwards seemed to signal the closing of a story, but also whispered promises of new tales yet to come. They didn't rush. There was no skipping or fast-forwarding, just the peaceful, steady rhythm of names, music, and the occasional creak of the house settling around us. Sometimes the sound of the tape finishing was like a gentle lullaby. That mechanical click of the tape reaching its end, the slight pause. Then the soft hiss as the VCR automatically ejected the cassette. I would often watch the tape slide free, shiny and black, as if it held all the magic of the evening inside its plastic shell. That moment was like the final breath of the perfect night. Do you remember how the couch felt just right then? Neither too hard nor too soft, like it was made just for moments like this. And the house, usually so noisy during the day, was now calm and quiet, almost reverent. Outside, the world was dark and still, but inside, the memories of the movie and the warmth of the night lingered. More than once, I found myself nodding off before the tape was even fully ejected. The flickering light from the screen, combined with the softness of the cushions and the gentle hum of the VCR, was an irresistible invitation to sleep. I could feel the day's worries slip away, replaced by a peaceful kind of tiredness that only comes after a night filled with laughter, stories, and a little bit of magic. Falling asleep right there, on the couch, with the TV still on, was part of the ritual. It was like a silent thank you to the night for giving me a moment to escape, to dream, and to feel connected to something larger than myself, even if it was just the story on the screen. Sometimes I'd wake up later, blinking, in the dim light, noticing the tape resting on the floor or the coffee table, slightly out of reach. The house would be colder, the night deeper, but that warm feeling in my chest would stay with me. I knew that those memories would linger long after the morning came. Do you ever wonder why those simple nights felt so special? Maybe it was the waiting, the anticipation, the shared excitement of pressing play. Or perhaps it was the way the imperfect picture and fuzzy sound made everything feel more intimate, more real. Maybe it was just the magic of being together, even when we were quietly watching a story unfold on a small screen in our living room. Whatever it was, I miss those nights. The gentle hum of the VCR, the soft crackle of the tape, the feeling of wonder mixed with calm. The way the world seemed to pause just long enough for us to catch our breath. And now, when I hear the faint click of a tape ejecting or see a VHS box sitting quietly on a shelf, I can't help but smile. Because I know those moments weren't just about watching a movie. They were about being present, about slowing down, about making memories that still glow warmly inside my heart. Thank you for joining me on this nostalgic journey through the magic of VHS movie premieres at home in the 90s. I hope this story brought back some special memories for you too. Maybe you even felt a little of that cozy magic tonight. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to share your own VHS memories, please leave a comment below. I love hearing about your favorite moments. From those simpler times, until next time, sleep well and dream softly under the gentle glow of memories and VHS magic. Good night.